So my name is Richard Lorgeson. I'm the professor. I'm a professor in mathematics at University of Illinois and the former graduate director there for 5 years until just recently. And do you want to give a brief introduction?
Yes, so I'm Christine Burkish, and I'm at Minnesota. This is my 6th year on faculty there, and I got recruited pretty early to help recruit grad students. So I believe this is my 4th year looking through applications, if not another one. And now Minnesota has just become a partner of Math Alliance too, and we currently have 8 Alliance students in our department. So.
Okay, I haven't actually counted up how many we have, but I know we have quite a few, and we've got a grad student here with us who came through Field of Dreams as an undergrad. So when I started as grad director at Illinois, we had about 5% of our US students being underrepresented minorities. And remember, international students do not count. This is something we constantly have to explain to our administration. So, if the number that they have on their dashboard is 10% URM, underrepresented minority, for our department, that really means 20% of the domestic students, because we're half and half domestic and international. Today, we're up to 28% of the US students being underrepresented minority students, and they're really doing brilliantly in our PhD program. And so the Field of Dreams and the SACNAS conference have been 2 key components of our recruiting effort. Let me touch on a few points that I hope our panel can expand upon during the hour. So one is that recruiting is really a team effort, I'm no longer the graduate director, but I still do recruiting. My department chair, when I was grad director, he would meet individually with prospective students. So it wasn't just one person, and there's got to be a commitment from at least some key people in the department. You're never going to get everybody on board. A lot of our colleagues just like to spend their time in their office doing research, so you can't hope for too much help from everybody. But the department chair gave me money for travel to Field of Dreams, to SACNAS, to a wonderful REU program at MSRI called MSRI Up. And so I would go there every year. And, you go there, you've got, I think, 18 students to talk to there. You have very little competition from other graduate directors. Field of Dreams here, wonderful number of students. You mingle, you mix, you talk, you make connections, and before you know it, you're finding people are interested in your graduate program. Okay, admissions. So that's recruiting. Admissions, I would say, requires an open mind. Many departments have rigid admissions procedures that will rule out the vast majority of underrepresented minority applicants. That's not a good thing. If you have a hard GRE subject score cutoff in your admissions procedure, then don't be surprised if you never manage to diversify your PhD program. And remember that the GRE subject exam does not tell you how well somebody's going to do in a PhD program. If you look at how people actually do in your program, you'll see that the GRE subject score is a really poor predictor of many, many things, including completion. The exam system in many PhD programs actively destroy budding mathematical careers. And programs that weed out large numbers of incoming students in particular, and we've all heard of such weed out programs, unfortunately they still exist. Those programs are a disgrace to the profession. If your program is like that, please take that message on board, but also remember, that can change. You can do something about it and turn yourself into a program that actively supports the students you bring in and helps them succeed. After all, you put a lot of effort into recruiting students. Wouldn't you want them to succeed once they're in your program? Okay, so we touched briefly on recruiting, admissions, exam systems, and then mentoring. Once somebody's in your program, you want to support them. So as graduate director, it was part of my job to meet every PhD student in our program once a year. I would have individual meetings with them. I knew what was going on academically. I knew what their career plans were. And when an opportunity came up, I knew who to contact. Other programs like Purdue do a wonderful job. They have a distributed mentoring system where every first-year student gets a faculty mentor, separate from an academic advisor, but a mentor who's checking in with them and has a job to make sure that they're settling well into the program. Okay, so I think those are the 4 sort of key points that I hope, along with others, we'll touch on: recruiting, admissions, exam systems, and mentoring.
Okay, so I have a very similar list. I'm a stand-in for our DGS, Dick McGehue, who's at his own birthday conference this weekend. So I've been helping him do some of this. One of the big things he does is go out and also actively recruit at different RUs. He visits a lot of liberal arts colleges. And a lot of the post-bac programs. So we've really developed pipelines with some of those programs, and we tend to get, at least one student a year typically from several of these programs now. And so part of it in building those relationships, he was able to establish now some credibility with the faculty sending us these students so that they know that we'll take care of them, which has been huge. And yes, along with that then is this math subject GRE score. If you go through the spreadsheet and rank those students by GRE score, your department's going to look very homogeneous as far as the graduate students go. So we've found that we really have taken a holistic approach to how we evaluate files. So we're not looking for students that have certain test scores, but we want to make sure that they have, yes, certain classes, but that there are other parts of their file that matter, right? So students that have overcome adversity have other soft skills that other students aren't going to have. So finding something like that you could view as a plus for a student in a different way than a high test score would be. And it also changes then the culture of your graduate students when you start admitting a cross-section of students that have these different life experiences. So thinking about it in terms of the life experiences of the students and trying to build a community of students, not just people to populate TA ships that have high test scores, makes a really big difference in the overall atmosphere of the department, but in particular, I think has a really positive effect for students that are from groups that are typically underrepresented in mathematics. So there is that, and then, as we go to admit them, then making sure that, as we just heard, kind of getting this team approach, so making sure that there are several faculty members, several graduate students who are talking to these students, and making sure that they know that they'll be supported in our program. Again, we don't admit students who we don't think can be successful in our program. We want to eliminate that stigma of trying to prove yourself once you arrive. So we start with the assumption that they can do the program, and now it's a question of whether or not it's what they want to do with their lives, and try to guide them through the program in that way instead, so helping them to really make decisions with their interests in mind instead of trying to hit some bar that may feel out of reach and given imposter syndrome. We know that sometimes the way that things are perceived by students aren't how they should be taken in reality. So yeah, once we have the students, then keeping them in the program is another thing. And I think the active mentoring is a super important part. So our Alliance students in particular have assigned mentors. We would like to do this across the board. We are still kind of in the pilot phase, making sure we have enough people we trust to have good mentoring skills. And we have lots of contact with these students. We have some extra meetings that they're invited to. And we really try to step out far to address imposter syndrome and just the overall inadequacy feelings you can have, especially when you're starting out in graduate school, so that these students in particular know that it's not just them who maybe feel like they're in over their head as they start graduate school. And I guess the last thing on my list right now was that in order to recruit students from underrepresented groups, the best thing you can do is have students from underrepresented groups. So in particular, keeping these students around once you do recruit them is super important. But also building that community then, once you have a critical mass, it's so much easier to recruit more students because then they have somewhere with a greater sense of belonging that will also make them more successful. So everyone really wins.
Okay, first of all, let me apologize to both of us for being late. We were at another meeting and we got here a little late, so I apologize. The second thing I wanted to say is I'm very pleased with what's been said so far, in the sense that two topics that we didn't really intend to cover, but I'm happy that we did, is what kind of an environment we should have for the students. And I just heard Rick's comments on that. And we do the same thing as Purdue does. We have a mentor for each student with the commitment. We can talk about that another time. What I really wanted to have this session for was we have had relatively new folks forming doctoral program groups and coming and recruiting at the fair. And some people get students and some don't. So I wanted to give you a little bit of advice, some of which you've heard already, about what would attract students to your program. So I'm assuming that you already understand what was said, which is, first of all, that you should never admit a student that's not going to thrive in your program, and that once the student gets there, you have to build the kinds of structures, that community structures, et cetera, that mentoring that will make the student comfortable. Many students have no idea that you're planning to do that, or do they know of any particular history you've had up to that point. For example, at Iowa, when we started in 1995, we had never had a minority student. So let's just look at that for a minute. And we were in Iowa City, right? And so it was a place that's actually more diverse than it used to be, but it wasn't diverse at all at that time. And when we set out to do it, what we did first and foremost, and I highly suggest that you do that here and any chance you get, is we got to know the faculty at minority serving institutions. We didn't go to fairs, not much. Once in a while we went to a LS AMP meeting or something, but by and large we slowly built ties with what you now see as the Alliance mentors. In fact, that's how the whole Alliance got set up, was we mimicked what had worked at Iowa. So luckily you don't have to do that anymore. You've got lists of mentors, we can send them to you. We know the faculty, 800 faculty, right, that are producing minority students, and the Alliance FGAP program, our transition program, about 120 kids are here from that program, all of whom want to go to graduate school, and about 100 of whom are minority students. So there's plenty of students around. The thing is, where are they going to go? And why would they come to your place? Well, so here are the things you have to face. First of all, if you're not in a place with if the city you have doesn't have a lot of minority students, then you want to do something to work with the minority community in that city. We did that. So for example, if there's an AME church or a Baptist church, or there's even questions of haircuts and things like that, if there's a Spanish-speaking Catholic church, it sounds that we're not supposed to talk about religion, but in fact, we're dealing with cultures that are quite often very spiritual and have close ties to their own communities at home. And they don't want to hear that they're going to go to some place that's cold in the winter and cold in all kinds of other ways from their point of view. So it would be nice if you got to know, it sounds strange and maybe counterintuitive, if you got to know the pastor at the local church, or you got to know the priest at the local Catholic church. And if you said to them, listen, we have a plan here. We're hoping to bring minority students to our community, and we could use your support in helping us to make this happen. They'd be very happy to help you. If they're not happy the first time, go back the second time and tell them. So we did all that. That's what we did. Secondly, get to know the faculty at the schools. And third, most important, get to know the students early. So if you come here, you're going to meet these students early. They're going to come to your table. I've never heard anybody say that no one came to their table. So people come around and 30, 40 kids. Some people just take names and they maybe get in touch with them and they maybe don't. You should get in touch with every single student. If necessary, see if you get their cell phone number. Have one of your graduate students call the student. It's a question of building community. And Dick McGehee from Minnesota, he did. It's quite remarkable what he did in a very short period of time. What do you have, 15 Alliance students up there, 14? I don't know.
I think we have 8 officially.
8
but
officially. Are you sure it's only? I thought there was more. When I
That's
had
the
lunch with
number
them,
Dick gave me, and we
is it
just
8?
counted
Yeah.
the grad students.
Yeah, but in 3 years, right? In 3 years.
Yeah.
In 3 years, right? And they're all doing well. So Dick, what he didn't have, let's discuss the things he didn't have, or that Minnesota didn't have. It's true that the community is more diverse than some places, but the university is not particularly diverse, as far as I know, University of Minnesota.
Could be better.
It could be better, right? It could be better. It's cold, right? Colder than Iowa, right? And they don't have special stipends. That's the thing I want to say, because people say, oh, some of these schools have all these big grants and stuff, and they're paying for minority kids. That's false. In that case, it was certainly false at Iowa. We had no money of that sort. We finally got a little bit of GAN money, but that wasn't what brought the kids. So what brought the kids was actual personal contacts, getting to know the students. You do it here, getting to know the students here, keeping up with them, calling them up, asking them what their concerns are, telling them what's special about your program, and addressing the questions that they may be afraid to bring up, which is, what's the climate like at your, I don't mean temperature, right? I mean, what's the cultural climate like in your city? Tell them the truth, and tell them what the climate's like in your department. Tell them why you're here at the conference. All those sorts of things are the things. And then, as Rick said so well, when the students come, Illinois does a wonderful job, as he described. When the students come, you don't want to disappoint a single student. And I'll just say a couple words about that, because reputations build in the minority community very quickly, and there's a history of distrust, understandably. And so if a couple of kids come up from Birmingham or somewhere and flunk out, you're not going to see any more kids from that place, right? And you may not, the word may just get around. So when the students come up, remember the following things. Change your comp system so you don't flunk 50% of the kids if you're presently doing that. These are valuable students to us. You should know when they come whether they're good students for you. You shouldn't say, oh, we thought we'd give them a try and they didn't do so well. That's bad practice. Make sure that when the students come, that you know who they are, that you know that they're apt to succeed. So that's the first point. Have the student mentored. So that's a cultural issue, actually. So when the student comes in the first week, assign a faculty member to that student, and maybe a graduate student as well, who can serve to cross that cultural gap. There are things about mathematics or statistics or these fields that are not commonly discussed in the schools where the students are. That has led to all kinds of stress, stereotype, threat, all that sort of thing, when students don't believe they can make it. So that's a discussion you have in somebody's office, right? And that's a discussion you have quietly, and you don't have to put it in a negative way. You say, I wonder if you knew this about the University of Iowa. Let me tell you a little something about the math department. When you're in a class, these are the sorts of things that you do. And that you give that kind of information out. Remember, too, that you may very well have a student, because they came from a school without a doctoral program, you may very well have a student who doesn't know the lay of the land. That student may have come in, for example, in mathematics and been told correctly at their school that they were the best math student that they ever had, but that student maybe belongs in statistics, or the student maybe come in another field and belongs in another field. They don't know that because they haven't been exposed to the graduate program anywhere. So they may be taking a course and they may not like proofs, right? And there's nothing that says proofs are better than not proofs. It depends on the field, right? So if the student's taking a course with proofs and they've been told proofs are what math is, and they don't like proofs, they keep trying to do them, they maybe don't do so well. Don't let that student go through a year like that. That's crazy. Get the student in, say, how's your courses? They say, oh, I'm finding this hard. What do you think of proofs? Ooh, I don't like them. You say, okay, you probably wouldn't want to stay in pure math, which they may have been in, right? So all of that kind of community stuff, and keeping in mind that you're dealing with a population that has been unfortunately, for a long time, been forced to be alienated from our very narrow cultural environment of our own. That's the main thing, I think, that you want to keep in mind, and you need to convey that from the beginning as you recruit. So you want to, and also the last thing I would say is, never have a situation when one person's doing the recruiting and somebody else picks up the game when the kid gets it. They need to know someone all the way through, as many people in the department as you can. And I would say that's how we did it at Iowa, that's how Minnesota did it, that's how Purdue did it. These are all programs that started with no minority students and didn't have good funding, all the three of them. Illinois, I remember back Illinois before you were there 20 years ago, it didn't go so well, and it's going extremely well now. So all of these are programs that changed their culture and did it better. So when you go to that fair today, just remember all those things, and those students are waiting to talk to you, and good luck to you. So that's what I got to say.
My great apologies for not being here when the session started as moderator. Thank you very much for starting things off and realizing that you needed to do that. I think we'd like to open it up to questions now. Yes, in the back.
So when I was recruiting at SACNAS in my first year as graduate director, I ran into Ibelis Rubio de Francia from Puerto Rico, and she just said to me, take more than one. And fortunately, there were 2 students from Puerto Rico at the meeting. So I talked to both of them and ended up making offers to both of them. And one, Vanessa, she's here today at the meeting, and the other, Stefan, is going to graduate next year. So yeah, trying to find a way to get more than one student at a time. And if you find an institution with one good student, the chances are there's another good student there too.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Maybe as far as underrepresented groups go, we also, since 2010, have managed to get our graduate population up to about 40% women, which is a different critical mass, but also seems to make a difference overall with these numbers.
I think that, if I could just answer just quickly, I think the trick is how to get to the critical mass, because there's no question, I mean, Iowa now is about 15% of our graduate students are minority students, and the time to degree dropped radically when that number crossed 5 or 6%. It was amazing. We didn't do anything different. It was just we had a community. But I think for the short term, if you can bring maybe 2 students, one student is really isolated, I think. Unless you're in a community that's diverse, that's not going to be quite as hard, I think, because you can rely on the community. But if you bring a student to a place like Iowa City and 1 student, that's going to be difficult. On the other hand, you may find a student that would like to try that and be a pioneer and begin to change the culture. And if you bring that student down here to the conference next year and let that student help you recruit, then maybe you get 2 more students. So I would think that, I agree with Christina, ideally you'd like to have a critical mass. If you can build a critical mass with great care and I think a lot of intentionality over 2 to 3 years, that might not be so bad either. Yeah, go ahead.
Please.
I agree with many things what I heard, but about one thing I have a question, where I think all 3 very much insisted admit only students where you are sure they will do a great job. Well, I think you're speaking a little bit from a position of a privilege from schools which have a long tradition on big graduate program where you have a lot of applicants. I'm coming from a rather small school with a rather small PhD program, and this has actually nothing to do with minority students directly. This is the same for white Americans, this is the same for Asian students. Basically, if I would say we take only applicants where they are sure they will go through, I can say we can close down our program a little bit. And I think our practice shows actually that we have with many of these students really success. We have to take into account that some students don't make it, and I think we try to do a really good effort in mentoring, but nevertheless, not everybody succeeds. We get some students who come from our background which we would have maybe not taken, or other institutions would have not taken, who nevertheless then make a stellar career, get great postdoc positions, but some not. And I think this message, take only students who you're sure to succeed, I'm not sure what I should make out of it. I see merely a small thing, close down your small PhD program, and I don't think that this is a message what we want to convey.
So let me say something on that. There's an excellent book that I highly recommend. It's called Inside Graduate Admissions. Inside Graduate Admissions by Julie Posselt. She studied graduate admissions procedures across a wide variety of departments at a number of institutions. And if you read that book, you'll find that there are certain characteristics of success in PhD programs that are not to do with academic preparation, but are rather to do with personal qualities. So in particular, task orientation, somebody who just gets stuff done. We all know the student who sort of likes to dream big thoughts and sort of read with a superficial understanding the works of great mathematicians. That's not necessarily the kind of person you want. You want somebody who's actually going to get stuff done. And now, So if you look at students who are succeeding in your program, I wonder if you would see some correlation there. You know, what can you see in those students that meant that they succeeded and others didn't? And so it's not necessarily the students who come in with the best academic preparation. So I think when all of us talk about students that we are sure, or at least, you know, okay, you're crossing your fingers sometimes, but you're fairly sure they have what it takes to succeed, it's not just their academic preparation. It's because you've talked with them, preferably repeatedly. You've got a sense that they have the kind of personal solidity and determination that's going to get them through that PhD.
I'll add to that too. I think one of the things we've done is create a lot of flexibility in those first few years of graduate studies to try to help with these things, to try to make succeeding in the program actually proceeding not based on proving yourself on certain written exams or coursework right out the door. So we now have a preliminary exam system that you have, I believe, up to 4 years to complete. That involves, you know, eventually completing 2 written exams and 2 courses. You can take more exams if you want, but this goes back to the panel this morning. We were talking about how our exams have become very predictable. So it's not about learning certain tricks and like kind of, you know, learning hundreds and hundreds of different kinds of problems, but making sure that the students know the foundations, you know, the really foundational theorems in each area, and that they can solve certain kinds of problems, and they can predict with high regularity what those problems will be on the exam. So removing that randomness factor in the exams gives, I think, all of the students an easier time kind of preparing for those exams. But we also are very flexible. You know, if you fail the exam, okay, you try again. It's not that you're done. And so then with the mentoring and figuring out if there is a problem, we have the time built into our program to help the students get back on track.
If I could just say too, I'm in the same, agree with both of them. So we don't feel, in Iowa, we don't feel like we're just taking, under the standard rubric, great students, either white students or minority students or Asian students. What we do instead is want to have as much information as we can, as they were both saying, about the student by talking to the students, people at their place, meeting them here, et cetera, et cetera. We believe that if we know the student well, that we should expect the student to succeed. I mean, think about the opposite. Suppose I take a student in and I know them very, very well, and I don't think they have a good chance of making it at the University of Iowa. Why would I want them to come to Iowa? I mean, I can't imagine. So it's not like we say, oh, the kid's got a nice GRE score and they got all A's in their advanced math classes. That's the only kinds of kids we take. Quite the contrary. We take kids sometimes with very low GREs, as they do as well, and sometimes students. The system that we have here in the Alliance is designed for you to find out as much as you can about the student, to talk to them, to write to them. And then at the end of that, we hope you'll only take a student that you think can make it at your program, because why was that, to me, not making it in a program is a result of bad information. There was some expectation either on the part of the student or in part of the institution that didn't jibe. If everyone's got the same expectations, it's not as if nobody will ever flunk, but it wouldn't happen as a matter of, it wouldn't be 10, 15% of your students, certainly.
Oops, I've got someone.
Oh, I'm
We'll
sorry.
go.
You're the
I'm
moderator.
sorry.
Sorry.
Thanks, Phil. All right, yes, in the back.
wondering how the changes in the environment, like how do you implement these changes in the graduate program, and how the other faculty, like probably maybe started from some smaller group, how other faculty welcome these changes, and yeah, and if you can comment more on like, for example, yeah, flexibility, exam predictable, if you have any other things that you would suggest, or you can comment on that.
So changes. I guess I wasn't quite at Minnesota when the changes started, but I know our DGS has carte blanche to make a lot of these decisions on his own. So, Director of Graduate Studies. So Dick McGehee, who's usually here, is the one that really pioneered a lot of these changes, and then Paul Garrett, who is here along with him. And so for us, as far as the admissions part goes, so we have a larger graduate committee, right? So a larger group of faculty, and we divvy up all the applications for grad admissions and look at them. But then we actually have a subcommittee in the committee to specifically look at diversity issues and make sure that we have had, a few people carefully read those files to try to look for these identifiers of successful students that we think can succeed in our program. And that's been very helpful in just giving that extra thought and discussion to those students to make sure that we're selecting well. And yeah, also with our qualifying exam system, I think that's also done by committee, and we have a head system. So our department head has made sure that the faculty members on that committee have implemented this well. So it really took for us some action from the top, and then by a few who were in the right position to make the changes.
So at Illinois, the exam system was changed about 15 years ago, and it was a pretty contentious fight in the department. But nobody would go back to the old system. So now we have a coursework-based system where there's a list of courses. The student must pass at least 5 of them with sufficiently high grades, generally A-, a couple of B+ are allowed. And they have to take the real analysis and have to take the abstract algebra. So that's the sort of system we have now, and it's very flexible for the students because they have 3 semesters to accomplish that. They'll take other classes at the same time, of course. But if they need to take an undergraduate, say, second semester of undergraduate algebra before they take the graduate algebra, they can do that, and there's still time to get all that done. So, if you're trying to change that system in your department, I think you should ask yourself, well, first of all, what are we trying to accomplish with this system? And most people will say, well, we want the students to have a foundation of knowledge in mathematics, et cetera, et cetera. And then you ask, well, what's the connection between that and having a combined algebra and analysis exam one Saturday sometime in the early spring or something? I mean, really, there's no particular connection between these things. So, and if you don't believe that your graduate courses and the grades in them are telling you something about what the students have learned, then you've got a bigger problem than your exam system. You need to talk to your faculty. So some things that help us, as graduate director at Illinois, I had sole authority over admissions. So I had an advisory committee, but I was the one who could decide. So that does make things easier. It makes change happen faster. It was also important, and this is something to think about, if you want to change what's happening in your department, ask yourself, well, who wakes up in the morning thinking, this is my job, and if I fail at it, I'm going to be, I'm not only failing the students in the department, but I'm also going to feel like a failure, and my colleagues are going to know I did not succeed. So whose job is it? Is it part of somebody's job description to improve the diversity in your graduate program? And if it's not, then don't expect too much change. But when it becomes somebody's job, I think you'll see some change happen. And I've forgotten if there were other parts to the question, but building out support within the department. Look, there's a core of people who care a lot about it, and it's very important that your chair or head be strongly supportive. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, just over time, you try to talk your colleagues around.
Okay. Back. Yes.
I'm Bill Jones. I teach at Xavier University. It's a minority, the only Black and Catholic school in the world, and in New Orleans. And I have found a little bit of change over the last few years at Xavier in my student population. I'm getting a larger, and I think this is probably true of the other HBCUs. Perhaps the impression was that HBCUs were taking weak students and barely getting them through Calculus 3 and then trying to get them into graduate school. In fact, it's just the opposite. Now I've got students who are coming in with AP credit. They take my real analysis class, abstract algebra, by the time they finish their junior year, and we really just can't afford to give them any other math classes. So I would like to see the Alliance schools offer some scholarships to get some of our senior math majors interested in coming to your schools to take a few courses that they need to finish graduation and move transfer back to our school. We're willing to accept courses in, if they still need a literature class or a psychology class, along with allowing them to take either, a first graduate course that they're prepared for, or even, some undergraduate courses these kids need some scholarship
Oh,
monies
yeah.
for that senior year. And I would like to see, you know, some sort of scholarships. Right now, I don't know if you know this, but it seems like there's this new move to 4+1 program. You heard of those? Where a school that has a graduate program allows its seniors to take 12 hours of graduate credit during their senior year. And those 12 hours are counted both toward finishing the bachelor's degree and toward their graduate degree. So it's double counted. Now, the accrediting agencies allow this up to 12 hours with, as long as you take 126 hours minimum to graduate, which is not that much more for the students to do. Now, this is not really new. I did this when I was an undergraduate in the 1960s. Yes, I am a dinosaur. And it really helps the student get a leg up, get started. So instead of having a 5-year graduate program, they've really got a 6-year graduate program when their senior year is double counted like that. So it gives them a little bit more time to figure out what they want to do and get the background that they need to succeed in your real heavy graduate courses.
Thank you. Okay, in the back. Again.
Dr. Custo mentioned the important continuity in terms of the individual that starts the recruiting process with the student, and the fact that that someone else may end up taking that over. And I think this is an area that we acknowledge, but I think we don't put as much importance as we need to, because in the beginning of the recruitment process, most of the emphasis is put upon what is the organization's requirements for the student to participate. At that part of the process, the student often expresses concerns about weaknesses he and she may have, and if there's a problem, it's usually worked out between the recruiter and the student. And if that recruiter were to continue, there wouldn't be a problem for the student. But my concern is, a lot of the times, we change recruiters and that student ends up with a new person, and that information doesn't get carried over. So I think sometimes this may leave the students a little vulnerable. So Dr. Cusko, if you or anybody would like to expand on that in terms of, you know, what is the status of that, what is the concern, and if there is a problem, what are some of the things we might do to address it?
Yeah, I think it's he's saying the right thing. So there are programs where, not here, we don't have them here at the Field of Dreams hardly at all, but there are programs that are interested, let's be honest, there's a whole landscape of graduate programs. And in the past, some of them have engaged in practices that none of us would like to see continue. And one of them is recruiting students with money, minority students, all sorts of ways. And the recruiter builds a very closely, sometimes the recruiter's not a math person, right? It's somebody from a diversity office at the university, for example, builds a very close tie, persuades the department to accept the student, and when the student gets there, it's an entirely different expectation than was. And that's something that's mostly gone now, I hope. And it's done more unfortunately, from high school to college, where you still see a whole lot of that. But that's something that I agree with you completely. And that doesn't much happen here. One of the things we like to think about, and why I think it's good to have this panel, is we've talked to our students here a great deal about being good consumers. And they would, I think, catch that now. I think they'll want to talk to faculty. They'll want to get to know you. If you're not getting students, I think that's the reason, is they just haven't gotten to know your department well enough.
Yeah, I want to dovetail on the dinosaur. But I want to thank several institutions. I teach at Caruso State University, and actually here in St. Louis, which is another HBCU, and several neighboring institutions, which I would call our names, Salem University and Washington University, have actually offered those kinds of things that he was talking about to our students. And I can say that's really helpful if they can do a course or still be in St. Louis, because they're still talking to us at Caruso at the same time. And I think that for some students might really help a transition really well. And so that has actually started to happen.
Other questions?
Can I say
I-
something?
yeah.
Yeah. The title of the panel is How to Recruit Alliance Students. So I'll just run down a list of a few practical tips. So if your department's not doing these things already, here are some ideas to try. So, okay, go to Field of Dreams. Check. You've done that one. Meeting with students. So, when you come to Field of Dreams, how are you spending your time? If you bring a graduate student with you, that's even better. Bring a minority graduate student who's already in your program can speak with a lot more authenticity than I can, for instance, about what the experience is like in our graduate program. The SACNAS meeting is also very valuable. There's a one-day pre-meeting. So SACNAS is a national organization. They have their meeting in October every year. It's about a 3-day meeting. There's a one-day pre-meeting organized by the Math Institutes collectively. They rotate the job around. And so that starts at noon on a Wednesday, concludes at noon on the Thursday, and then the main SACNAS meeting picks up around then at noon on the Thursday. So you've got talk sessions, you've got poster sessions. At the joint math meetings, you go to all the undergrad poster session, you talk with all the students. I hope that when your department reps go to the joint meetings, you've looked already at the application list to your graduate program and then scanned through the participant list to see which of those applicants are at the joint meetings. You send them email, you arrange to meet, have a 20-minute, half-hour conversation. You'll get a lot of good students that way with that kind of personal contact. So at all of these meetings, the routine is kind of the same. You have to actually talk with students. If you've met them before, you want to meet them again. Okay, so some other things you can do back in your office are you can send out publicity material. You can get to know REU faculty leaders at programs, particularly in your part of the country. Although, as I said, also, I used to travel out to San Francisco for the MSRI UP program every summer. And get to know where your alumni are. So if you have graduated in the past, minority students from your program, keep in touch with them. Let them know what you're up to. Bring them back to campus for visits when possible. And follow up. So Phil referred to this earlier. So you're getting students' email addresses and maybe phone numbers at this meeting. When are they going to hear from you next? What are they going to hear from you? Is it going to be a generic message, or is it going to be something tailored personally to what you remember learning about them in the conversation? So people really notice whether you're paying attention to them as individuals or just seeing them as, okay, this is part of my job, I'm here at the meeting. So I hope everybody here in the room has that personalized approach. You follow up over a period of years. You figure out when they're graduating, make a note in your planner, contact them the next year. There's a student here who was in Hawaii as an undergrad. Now she is a master's student at San Francisco State. So I know she's graduating not this year, but the year after. I'll certainly be in touch with her next year about her plans.
Yeah, I can add to that. The joint meetings have been huge for us, and I know I'm always impressed. I can walk by Dick's office anytime we're going through the admissions process, and off the top of his head, any of maybe 100 different applicants, he can tick off all kinds of information about them. It's very impressive. But he does. He makes sure to talk with every student he can at the joint meetings, and in particular, any Minnesota faculty and any graduate students who are at the joint meetings, we try to gather and have a lunch for any students, any undergrads who applied. So besides trying to have these individual conversations, we try to get our students and those applicants together with whichever faculty are there and actually feed them and give them time to just have that informal discussion. And again, that's a great community builder.
I used to carry, when I was actively recruiting still, I'd carry the phone numbers, the cell phone numbers of, no, I'm not kidding, of 4 or 5 of our faculty in different fields. And I would say to the student, what are you interested in? The student would say, I'd sort of like to learn about abstract algebra. I say, so-and-so would be very eager to work with you. Would you like to talk to her? Would you like to talk to him? And I would just dial a number, and I'm talking to a professor at the University of Iowa, which was, perfectly legitimate because and then that professor was there to mentor them. So all that kind of thing like that is anything you can do to build community. The other thing, when you're talking to the students at your table, ask them if they'd be interested in speaking with one of your graduate students and get their phone number or get their email, however you want to do it, and have one of your graduate students. Doesn't have to be a student of color. In fact, not to take time, but very quickly, one time I decided to do that in general and help have our graduate students proactively write to some of the recruiting students. And there was a kid in the program, a white kid who'd come from Texas. And I thought to myself, why am I only having students of color writing? And I said to him, he hung around with all the minority kids. I said, why don't you write a note? He said, you want me to write a note? I said, yeah. He says, well, I'm white. I said, well, you're not as white as when you first came here. Go ahead.
Any other questions? Yes.
One other comment to follow up what you're all talking about, the personal attention. One of the, actually from the University of Missouri Columbia, he's usually at this meeting. He actually drove from Columbia to St. Louis on a Friday afternoon to meet with a student for 1 hour, turned around and drove back, and that student ended up going to their program. So, I mean, you know, everyone can't do that, but I think any of these kind of personal things really do make a difference.
And actually, I think the things we're saying, because he's a great guy, right? Steve Montgomery Smith, right? But in fact, the things you can do, as these folks were saying, doesn't have to be labor intensive at all. It just has to be community building. You have to actually think to yourself that you're building a community. And actually, if your department doesn't have that community feeling in your graduate program, you might want to consider doing that anyway. Because a department that has a community sense in their graduate program is one of the nicest places to work that you'll ever find. Our department changed radically in that way. It was just a pleasure to go to work in a place that had that community sense to it. So.
Okay. I'd like to thank all of our panel members and the audience for their questions.